Marsden.
I don't know what to say to that. I mean, he really talked me up. It's great. That's really good. I'm going to move around a lot, Daryl, so I'm sorry. It just helps kind of. So first of all, thank you guys for coming tonight. I'm so happy to see such a great crowd. I'm so glad to hear that I'm not the only weirdo that likes cult psychology. So thank you guys for coming. This is great. We are going to talk about some really interesting stuff tonight. We're going to talk about human behavior. We're also going to talk about some things that are a little heavy. So I just want to prepare you for that. But in general, it's going to be a really good talk. So I'm going to talk for about 45 minutes. Okay? I know it's a long time. Just bear with me. I'll try to be entertaining. And then I'm going to leave about 15 minutes for questions or so at the end. So let's get started. Let's talk about cults. So this is kind of the rundown for tonight's event. So first I'm going to talk about what exactly is a cult, and then I'm going to talk about how does a cult leader maintain control of that group of people. And then we're going to get into who the heck even joins a cult, right? Who does that? And then we're going to talk about what happens if your friend joins a cult. What should you do? And then we're going to talk about those factors that lead to cult aggression, that lead to some of the terrible things that we're going to end up talking about. So first, when we think about a cult, this is what we think of, right? Oh yeah, these scary, brainwashed people that follow like they're like a zombie, right? They just follow the leader into violence and into chaos. But there's really a lot more to a cult than just brainwashed zombies. There's a lot more to it. So first of all, a cult is a group of people. You can't really be a cult of one. You have to have a following, right? So it's a group of people who encourage conformity. When we talk about conformity, we talk about everybody being the same, right? So they encourage conformity. They encourage a shared belief system where everybody believes the same thing. Again, conformity, right? They're also really concerned about social cohesiveness and having a tight-knit group. So far, this doesn't sound terrible, right? It's this last bullet point that we'll talk about. They consider the group to have a charismatic or even a divine power. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. So as I go through my talk tonight, I want to kind of compare each of these bullet points to a cult that you guys might have heard of. Has anybody ever heard of Jim Jones? Okay, yeah. Do you guys know what church it was that he was the pastor of? None of my students who took psychology of cults is allowed to answer this. Anybody know what his church was called? The People's Temple. Good, yes, the People's Temple. That's Jim Jones up there. So he was the leader, and he was a pastor, right? He started the People's Temple. He actually started it in Indiana. He just wasn't there for very long. He was in Indiana, and then he moved to San Francisco, California, and then from San Francisco, things didn't quite go the way that he had planned, so he moved his congregation to Guyana in South America. Honestly, the purpose of the People's Temple when they started was really beneficial. It was good. They were all about community service. They had a child care system for people that needed it, and it was free. They had a soup kitchen to help feed the hungry, and they also did a lot of political campaigning to make sure that the politics that would support them were elected. So the purpose really was pretty good. We'll kind of talk about that. We'll talk about how his downfall happened, what was the triggering event. So like I said, a cult is going to encourage conformity. When we talk about conformity, what we're really talking about is behavioral norms, right? Things that are acceptable by society. So behavioral norms are how we're supposed to behave in certain situations. So we go to class, right? How are we supposed to behave? We're supposed to sit and listen to the professor, right? But you guys are not so great, thank you. We also have behavioral norms for how you're supposed to greet people. Maybe you shake a hand or a slight nod of the head, right? We also have norms for religious practices, marital practices. We have behavioral norms for everything that we're supposed to do, right? This is what you're supposed to do when this happens. So those are our behavioral norms. And cults definitely use behavioral norms to their advantage. So why is conformity so important? Well, Freud said that there is something unmistakably at work in the nature of a compulsion to do the same as others, to remain in harmony with many. We like that. We like to remain in harmony with other people. Nobody really likes confrontation or aggressiveness or being super assertive. We like when things go well, right? We like to be in harmony with other people. And we do that by having these norms to our behavior. So by having norms, we're in harmony. And really, we're attracted to things that are similar to us, that are familiar to us, and that fall within our routine. Because that's what a cult does, right? It recruits people that are similar in a lot of ways, that become familiar, almost like a family with one another, and they definitely have structure within the group. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about an old research study that was done in the 1940s and 1950s on conformity, because conformity isn't new, right? It's something that we've been studying for a really long time. So Ash was one of the first scientists to really look at conformity and to understand it in a different way. So what he did was he took undergraduate students, just like some of you in here, some undergraduate students, and asked them to come to the lab and said, I'll give you extra credit if you participate in this study. So, we have one participant up there in blue, all right? He's our actual real participant. And then we have 6 people in red. It's kind of hard to tell, but they're in red. Those people are also undergraduate students, but they were in on the study. They were a Confederate. Their role was to manipulate the guy in blue. So the task, Ash asked all of these people, all right, here's my standard line, and there are 3 comparison lines. Which of the comparison lines does the standard line match? What do you guys think? What's the answer? A. A. It's obviously A, right? But what if, while you were waiting to answer, every single person before you said B, 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 B? What would you do? First right way. I'd say B. I'd say B, right? They must know something that I don't know, so I'm just going to say B. And you know what? You're right. 33% of the time, people would conform. So out of the 3 of you right here, you're the conformist. Luckily, 66% of the time, people are like, y'all are crazy. It's obviously A, right? But that still means that a third of the people are conformists. And those are the people that a cult targets. All right, so the People's Temple, using our example, they encouraged conformity for sure. So there was rules that were never written down, but definitely understood by all the people. They were supposed to dress similarly, right, make their own clothes. They were supposed to act similarly. And one of their main rules was they were never allowed to criticize Father. That's what they called Jim Jones. So they weren't allowed to criticize him, his wife, or his children. And if you ever stepped out of line, if you ever didn't conform with the rest of the group, you were punished. It was dangerous to be different, so people were not different. Right? Conformity is key. Conformity is important for control, which we'll talk about later. So a cult is going to have a shared belief system. A shared belief system is exactly what it sounds like. So everybody shares the same beliefs. So by having a shared belief system, one way that you can create that is by having a close-knit communication system, right? Where you really control the information that's coming into the group and coming out of the group. So acceptable views are encouraged. Oh, you're saying things that I agree with. Great, yeah, keep saying that, right? Oh, you're saying something that I disagree with. Nope, we're not going to have that. I'm going to punish you for that. So it generates disillusionment. It generates disillusionment, and it also encourages more passive conformity. So it's another way to control. Honestly, creating a shared belief system really isn't that hard to do. I mean, think about it. We do it every day, right? We all in this room have a shared belief system already. Just the fact that we're all Americans, or at least living here in America, right? We have a shared belief system. So it's pretty easy to create a shared belief system. I mean, after all, human beings are social animals, right? And we like to be with other people. We like to be with other people that are similar to us and believe the same things that we do. So it's actually hardwired into our brain. It's an innate trait, something that's part of our biology. So in general, human beings want to be altruistic. They want to help other people. They want to work together in the face of adversity and overcome struggles together as a group. And cults prey off of that. They know that people are like that, and they use that to their advantage. So the People's Temple, not any different, right? Their goal was to create a positive relationship with the community. That's really positive. That's a good thing. Over time, we'll talk about this, over time, Jones became a little unstable, right? And so when he started to become unstable, he said, you know what? Our new goal is to feed the hungry. So we're going to move to South America and start a farm. And the farm's going to create food that's going to serve us, the people of South America, and eventually the entire world. So it really is a positive thing that they were working for. And because they believed so strongly in this goal, and because they really did want to make a difference in the world, they tolerated a lot of Jones's very erratic, very violent behavior. All right, a cult is also going to show concern for social cohesiveness. Again, being a tight-knit group. Now, this isn't necessarily bad, right? As Daryl mentioned, I was in the military. And when you go through basic training, you become cohesive with those other people. Is there any veterans in here? No? Oh, right.
Yeah, right here.
Yeah, you do? Good. So you guys know what I'm talking about, right? Excuse me. So the military basically creates cohesiveness by making you work together to achieve your goals, right? If you can't trust the person next to you, there's a problem. Because those people you might actually depend on to save your life. So it's important to form strong relationships with one another. Cohesiveness, again, it's not always bad, but a cult knows how important cohesiveness is, and they take it to a whole nother level. All right, when a group possesses strong cohesiveness, it increases commitment to one another, right? They're going to do more for each other because they really are committed to one another. They're going to protect each other from threats, and they're going to make sure that the group has all of the resources that they need in order to survive. So they're going to work together to achieve their goals. Social cohesiveness is the most essential part of a cult. You have to have that, otherwise the cult's not going to exist. That is essential. So how do we build social cohesiveness? Well, when a person joins a group, the people around them are like, oh man, it's really great to have you in our group, and they accept you. And that feels really good. And when you're accepted, your stress goes down, right? And the more you hang around with these people, the more you like them, and that lowers your stress even more. And then the longer you're with the group, your stress is lowered even more. So by building a nice, tight social system, it lowers your stress. Now, this is true of any nice, tight social system, not just cults, right? You have that core group of friends or family that you really like hanging out with, it decreases your stress. Same thing with cults. Just like I was saying, there is a dramatic increase in our psychological well-being whenever we join a group that accepts us. I always hear this with our students. They say that they come to Beacon and they feel accepted. And that's such a great thing to hear. Does that mean we're a cult? No, absolutely not. I'll talk about that in a little bit later. But really, the reason why we're feeling this is because of operant conditioning. Operant conditioning is all about rewarding good behavior and punishing bad behavior, right? So the reward in this case is feeling good after you spend time together. So I spend time with the cult members and it makes me feel good, and I want to do it again, and I want to go back, and I want to see more of them, and I want to hang out with them more often. So it reinforces that reward, right? We feel good, we want to go back. We feel good, we want to go back. So it's just reinforcement, that's it. Again, the cults know that, and they use rewards as a way to really make you conform to their rules. All right, so how did the People's Temple use social cohesiveness? Well, the members would devote all of their time and resources to the group. They would quit their jobs and work for the church. They would give up all of their money. They would turn over their cars, their houses, anything for the group. They would devote all of their time to the community, and they would be really involved, and they would go out and recruit people and tell people how fantastic the church is. They would try to enlighten others through the Word of God. Jim Jones's version, right? They really wanted to work hard together to achieve their goals. But there were some problems. One member said that though Jones's rule was tyrannical, bad, right? He said, still, People's Temple was a family, if a punishing family. It was an intense experience of coming together and living together with people from all sorts of different backgrounds. And it satisfied this basic desire that he had to connect with all of humanity. Well, what a great thing, right? To join a group and to feel this way after joining the group? Well, that's amazing. When you think about it this way, it's no wonder that people keep going back to the cult, because it makes them feel good. He felt so good about this particular goal that he was willing to put up with a lot of those crazy behaviors that we see later by Jim Jones. All right, so speaking of the tyrannical Jim Jones, how did he stay in control? How did he maintain control of the group? Well, he knew that when his members were dependent upon him, their stress was lower, their anxiety would decrease. So he had to maintain an intense relationship with every single one of his members, and he did. He would go out into the community and he'd talk to them and he'd get to know them, he'd do one-on-ones with them. He spent a lot of time with each of the members of his group. He knew that if he didn't do that, their anxiety would increase and they would end up like poor Morty here. Just way stressed out, right? So he knew that he had to make sure that they were dependent upon him and that they spent a lot of time with him. This is called the relief effect. So when you spend time with someone and it decreases your anxiety, it relieves your anxiety, right? The relief effect. So instead of being like Morty, his members were like, this is nice. It's good stuff, right? So it really is operant conditioning. The relief effect is operant conditioning, but how does the leader do operant conditioning? Well, I think we need to take a little step back and ask ourselves, how does a movement even begin? So I'm going to take a minute and pull up my video for you guys.
Let's watch a movement happen, start to finish, in under 3 minutes, and dissect some lessons. First, of course, a leader needs the guts to stand alone and look ridiculous. But what he's doing is so simple, it's almost instructional. This is key. You must be easy to follow. Now here comes the first follower with a crucial role. He publicly shows everyone else how to follow. Notice how the leader embraces him as an equal. So it's not about the leader anymore, it's about them, plural. Notice how he's calling to his friends to join in. So it takes guts to be a first follower. You stand out and you brave ridicule yourself. Being a first follower is an underappreciated form of leadership. The first follower transforms a lone nut into a leader. If the leader is the flint, the first follower is the spark that really makes the fire. Now here's the second follower. This is a turning point. It's proof the first has done well. Now it's not a lone nut and it's not two nuts. 3 is a crowd and a crowd is news. A movement must be public. Make sure outsiders see more than just the leader. Everyone needs to see the followers because new followers emulate followers, not the leader. Now here come 2 more people, then 3 more immediately. Now we've got momentum. This is the tipping point and now we have a movement. As more people jump in, it's no longer risky. If they were on the fence before, there's no reason not to join in now. They won't stand out, they won't be ridiculed, and they will be part of the in crowd if they hurry. And over the next minute you'll see the rest who prefer to stay part of the crowd, because eventually they'd be ridiculed for not joining. And ladies and gentlemen, that is how a movement is made. So let's recap what we've learned. If you are a version of the shirtless dancing guy, all alone, remember the importance of nurturing your first few followers as equals.
Right. So that's how a movement is made. So what's the first step what's the first step in creating a movement? What did he say?
Stand up.
Yes, absolutely. You have to stand up, right? You have to have a mission that people are willing to follow, an idea that people are willing to follow. And then what? Scott?
You needed your first follower.
Yeah, you need your first follower, right? You need that first nut to follow you. And then once you get that first nut, that's pretty good, right? And then you can get another one and another one and another one. That's how it happens. You just get that first person to follow you, that first person to believe in you, and they will start spreading the word as well. So that's how a cult starts, just like any other movement. A lot of times cult leaders don't start out with the intention of having their members commit suicide. right? They start out with the intention of doing something good for the world, of making a difference. So the leader eases into the position of leader. Doesn't start out as a leader, but they ease into that position. It's really the first follower who gives the leader any type of legitimacy at all. So the leader has to recruit the right people, the people that believe the same thing that they do, that are searching for something great and that want to make a difference in the world. Once you find those people, now you give them some goals to work towards. That creates the cohesion that we talked about. And then after that, over time, usually some type of charismatic, or in some cases even divine power is given to the group, because now they're achieving their goals and they're making a difference. And they start to feel, well, the only way that we're possibly making this difference is because we've been blessed. Our leader has been blessed and our group has been blessed. And we have knowledge that you don't know, and the only way that you can get this knowledge is by joining our group. We know something you don't know. So the only way that you could possibly get that information is by joining the group. So how does a cult recruit its members? Well, first, once they find those people that are interested and have the same values and ideals as they do, they invite them to a workshop or a class. They say, hey, I know you really want to make a difference in the world. You should come to this class that my church is offering. It's really cool. We do really awesome things. And then once you go to that first meeting, the next day, they're texting you and calling you and saying, hey man, it was so cool to hang out with you. I had such a good time. You should come to our next class. And you're like, oh, these people really like me. That's really cool. I'm going to go to the next class. It was a good time. And then they start to get involved in more and more things. And the more involved they become, the more accepting they are of new ideas. And then this last bullet point, after they've been there for a little while, they start to use meditation, maybe drugs, maybe obsessive praying or constant lecturing, solitary confinement, or lack of sleep to help control their people. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that last bullet, because this isn't something that they normally do right away. You don't go to your first workshop and they're like, here's a bunch of LSD, right? They don't do that. They ease you into this idea. But why? Why would they even do that in the first place? Why would they use meditation or drugs? Now, some of these things, I don't want you to think all these things are bad, right? So, I mean, meditation can be really beneficial. Drugs, if you're prescribed them, can be very beneficial, right? So I don't want you to think these things are bad. But the way that
resistance.
Yes, exactly. Thank you. It opens up our minds to new experiences. It lowers our resistance, right? It destabilizes old attitudes and makes us willing to accept new truths. Okay, so that's really why they do it. So it creates cohesion and shared experiences. This whole talk we've been talking about how important it is to create cohesion by taking drugs together or meditating together or not sleeping for days together. It creates cohesion. When I was in the military, we weren't allowed to sleep that much. You guys remember that, right? That lack of sleep created cohesion because you would talk about it with your battle buddy. That shared experience can really go a long way with a cult. So the more they engaged in these behaviors, the more relief they felt, the less anxiety, less depression, less stress. They felt better the more they did these things. So how does that leader get them to identify with the group? Well, by working towards the goals and building friendships with those people, it starts to become part of their identity. Once it becomes part of their identity, it's much easier for them to accept unusual truths. They accept these unusual truths, and as outsiders, as people that aren't part of the group, we might say to them, that's an unusual thing to believe, right? And what do? They're in denial. They're in denial about it. One of Freud's great defense mechanisms. They say, no, that's not true, right? As an outsider, you can see the truth. As an insider, they can't see it. So if their cult leader, for example, said, the sky is green, you could take them outside and say, look, it's obviously blue, your leader is wrong. Yet they will deny it. Even though the facts are right there in front of them, they'll deny it. To the end, they'll deny it. So how does the leader maintain control over a long period of time? Jones was the leader of his group for a long period of time. It wasn't just 2 days and then it happened. It was a long time.
So how did he do this? Well, the first way that he did it was he suppressed their autonomy. He made them dependent upon him. Remember, we talked about that earlier. He spent a lot of time with his members. He forced dependence upon them and separated them from anybody that wasn't part of the group. He controlled all of the information that was going out to his members. Anything that kind of coincided with his beliefs, he would share that with the group. Anything that didn't, they weren't allowed to talk about it. He would also control the boundaries of the group and allow only certain people from the outside to come in and talk to the group. So he would protect them from what he called dangerous outsiders. So he would basically cut them off and isolate them. He also created lots of jargon, so then that way it was hard for the cult members to interact with people that weren't cult members because they weren't used to those jargons and unique labels. Over time, this creates xenophobia, where there's a fear of outsiders. So really, control is established through social pressure, not blunt force. I mean, some cults like Jones definitely used force, but social pressure goes a long way in a cult. So how did Jim Jones influence and maintain control? Well, he created a sense of belonging to something larger, of making a positive difference in the world. He had a strong sense of community and equality. That sounds great, right? If that was his whole mission, we wouldn't be talking about Jim Jones today. Unfortunately, over time, he started to think of himself as almost a god. He believed that he had a mystic, healing ability that would help other people. He started to believe that he was divine. And then what he would do is he would tell his members that he was divine. He would hold little ceremonies during congregation and have an actor pretend like they were sick, and he would go over and heal them. And all of a sudden, they could walk again, or they could see, or they could hear. Of course, this was all staged, right? But the congregation didn't know that. And then he would send out flyers telling his members about all these good things that he's doing all over the world, even though he wasn't actually even leaving the compound. But they didn't know that. And then, of course, Jim used threats. So, one of his members said there were veiled threats, there were innuendos that some of the members who had questioned Jones or had tried to leave had been quote-unquote taken care of. So one longtime member and father of 3 who had talked about leaving the church was mysteriously crushed between 2 railroad cars. And another member was killed driving her car because, as Jim explained, she was thinking negative thoughts. So he used threats. He definitely did. But this wasn't until years later. He didn't start doing that until they moved to Jonestown in South America. When they were still in California, when they were in Indiana, he wasn't doing anything like this, not this bad. Maybe some slight threats, but definitely not harming anyone. All right, so who joins a cult? Does anybody know who that guy is?
Oh, I've seen him before. It was on a YouTube video.
Heaven's Gate, yes! Marshall Applewhite, Heaven's Gate. Another cult that had a very tragic, awful, suicidal ending. So who joins cults like this, right? Who would join that crazy-looking man? He definitely looks a little crazy. Has anybody seen his videos? No, go on YouTube and just type in Heaven's Gate. You'll see some of his videos. They're really entertaining. So who would join a cult? Well, before we can ask who would join a cult, we need to think about who's being targeted by the cults. Because they definitely target people. They have meetings about, oh, who are we going to recruit? Who should we target? Well, the people that they target are those without any friends or family. They target people that maybe have mental health issues or physical disabilities or psychological disabilities. They target people with low self-confidence, low self-worth, low self-esteem. And finally, and this is the most important bullet, they target people who have recently experienced a very negative life event, such as a move across the country, the death of a loved one, maybe a really messy, awful divorce, maybe they were fired from a job or quit school. So that negative life event is something that they look for because they can manipulate that. In 2007, just last year, they did a study where they asked a whole bunch of cult members that left a cult, why did you even join in the first place? These are the top 3 reasons for why those people joined. The first one was so they needed to develop themselves a little bit more. They just had that desire to personally develop themselves. They were dissatisfied with their life, and they were on a spiritual quest. That middle one, that life dissatisfaction, goes really nicely with this experienced a negative event, right? So if you experienced a negative event lately, you could be targeted for a cult. Probably not, but you never know. All right, so now I say all of this, and we all assume that cults are always very, very bad. But here's a great example of somebody who joined a cult, and it really helped her. So her name was Janet. She was diagnosed with schizophrenia when she was young. She was in and out of the hospital her entire life because she was so sick, and she heard voices and she saw things that weren't there, so she had to take a lot of medication because of that. And that medication made her feel very foggy and out of it, and she just hated it. So her sister told her about the Divine Light Mission. Anybody heard of that one? No?
Is that the same thing as Divine Light Ministry?
No. No. It is a cult that's still operating today. It's just not very popular in the United States. It's a cult that originated in India. But they came here in the States in the 1960s, 1970s, and they stirred the pot, and then they got kicked out. So, but anyway, she joined the Divine Light Mission. Her sister talked her into it, and then once she was there for a couple months, she stopped taking her meds because she felt really good. She didn't have to take her meds again. She said she felt safe. She said that she finally knew what she was supposed to do because the group set forth very specific behavioral norms. So now she knew what was acceptable and what was not acceptable, and she felt so happy. Of course, this had a bad ending for her, but at the time, she felt very, very happy. So this type of supportive atmosphere that a cult creates really can help people that are struggling. Let's talk a little bit more about the Divine Light Mission Church. So like I said, it was a 1970s cult that came to the United States, originated from India. And if we look at the demographics of the group, you see that it's very vanilla, right? Everybody's single, everybody's white, everybody's young, everybody attended college, everybody had both their parents. There's a little bit of variability in religion, but really not that much. And if we look at this really neat old picture that was here in Orlando, you guys ready for it? This is great. It's hard to see. But yeah, okay, yeah, they look like a bunch of hippies for sure. But they look like just a bunch of regular college-age kids. If we changed their clothing and their hairstyle, it would be any classroom or any room today, right? So they look just like any other group of kids. So what makes the Divine Light Mission a cult? I mean, it seems okay, right? They helped Janet. Look at all these kids that joined. They can't be that bad. Well, one thing that's a little odd about the Divine Light Mission is that they do arranged marriages. And okay, that's maybe weird to us as Americans, but I mean, they originated in India, so not so weird there. That's not what makes them a cult. What makes them a cult is that their leader, Maharaji, believes that he has divine knowledge from God on who should marry whom. Whom should marry whom. So he believes that God tells him who is supposed to marry somebody else. And then he puts together the marriages. That's what makes them a cult. Not the arranged marriages, the fact that he believes God is telling him who to marry whom. Now let's look at the People's Temple, because that's been our example this whole lecture, right? The People's Temple was a little bit more diverse. They had a bunch of people from different occupations from all over the United States. They had medics, they had educators, they had law enforcement officers. And if we look at the demographics of race and age, again, we see some pretty good variability. There was blacks, there was whites, there was young people, there were old people. So they had a little bit more diversity. But what did all of these people have in common? They all wanted to make a positive difference in the world. And that's why Jim recruited them in the first place. They all wanted to make a positive difference. Oh, so your friend is in a cult. What do? Well, I'm going to put forth a little scenario for you guys, and I want you guys to tell me if this is a cult or not, okay? So your friend has joined a group where there's a uniform. Okay, that's not so weird, right? It has its own language and jargon. Again, not so weird. So far it's kind of sounding like the military, right? It stresses daily devotions to intense physical activity. Okay. Those daily devotions come from a central authority. Okay, still a little... Those daily devotions take place together in a central location with other people that are devoted to the group. They talk about it all the time and try to recruit you. And in some extreme cases, harming oneself physically is seen as a positive thing. Is this a cult?
Yes.
Yes.
Some of you are saying yes. Is anybody in here saying no?
No. It's a college football team.
Close, you're closer. It's CrossFit. It's not a cult at all, it's CrossFit. So CrossFit, there's a uniform. They all wear Reebok. All the athletes are sponsored by Reebok. They have their own jargon. A WOD is their workout of the day. They have their daily physical devotionals, which come from the CrossFit website or their CrossFit coach, which usually gets it from the CrossFit website. And then they all together practice their craft of CrossFitting at the gym, which they call a box. Again, that jargon, right? They talk about it all the time and try to get you to do it too. I don't know if you guys have ever had a friend that's done CrossFit. Yes, but that's all they talk about, and they constantly tell you, you gotta come do this, you gotta come do this. You're like, no, I'm good. Thanks, though. And then that last one that we talked about, they do encourage each other to push themselves so hard that their muscles start to deteriorate. They don't just become exhausted, but their muscles start to deteriorate and their blood becomes poisoned and they get sick, and in some cases, they might die. I know, that's pretty crazy, right? Talk about working out like crazy. But it's not a cult, right? It's not a cult. They're just really dedicated to working out. So why is this not a cult? Well, first of all, they're not isolated. They're allowed to go do CrossFit and then go back home to their family and friends and do their own thing. They can't only hang out with CrossFitters. They can still do their own thing. There's no divine presence, right? They don't believe that the CrossFit website comes from God. So there's no divine presence. And they can choose whether or not to participate. So if they decide not to go one day, maybe they'll get a little bit of crap from their friends, but that's it, right? So they can choose not to participate. So that's what makes CrossFit not a cult, although we like to joke about it and say that it is. But let's pretend that your friend has joined like a real cult, like one of the scary ones that we've been talking about, like Jim Jones. Okay, what do we do then? Well, first and foremost, it's really important to understand not to force them to leave, because they're not going to want to do it. They have to make a voluntary choice to leave the cult on their own. So, some common reasons for leaving. Remember that 2017 study that I told you about, that people left the cult? They also asked them, well, why did you leave? And the top reasons for leaving was, number one, they just stopped believing in the group. They stopped believing in the purpose and the mission. Maybe their family intervened and talked to them a little bit. Maybe they started to realize that the leader wasn't quite all there, was contradicting themselves. In some cases, there was abuse, so they left. And then maybe in some cases, they lost status in the group. So maybe they were the number 2 person, and then they dropped down to the number 10 person, and they decided, no, I'm out, not gonna do this. Whatever the reason for leaving, they have to feel like the decision was their own. They have to feel like the decision was their own, otherwise they're not gonna wanna leave. And even when the decision is their own, and even when they've decided to leave, they're still going to experience anxiety and stress. They're still going to maybe go through a bout of depression. So as a friend, the most important thing that you can do is be there for them. Be supportive. Help them through this transition in their life as they leave the group and come back. Help them and be there for them. Never try to forcibly remove them, because it's not going to go well. They did this a lot in the 70s with deprogramming. They would go into the cults in the middle of the night and kidnap their kids and bring them home, and then they would hire a deprogrammer to go in there and brainwash them. Guess what the success rate on that is? 0%. It doesn't work. the kid always somehow leaves and goes back to the cult. Even when parents used conservatorship laws and found their child mentally unfit to live on their own and had to move back home, they still ran away and joined the cult. So do not force them to leave. Help them come to the realization that they need to leave, but don't force them to leave. All right, so the last thing that I want to talk about today is what causes cult aggression. This is kind of the heavy part that I was talking about. So how do we go from Jim Jones, who's all about equality and community and doing the right thing, to mass suicide? How do we get to that point? How do we get to the point where one man can tell his people to drink Kool-Aid laced with cyanide and causes almost 1,000 people to die? And not just voluntarily, but to kill their children as well, and forcibly inject babies with Kool-Aid that's laced with cyanide. How did we get to that point? Well, the first thing that Jones did was he isolated himself, right? He took his congregation out of California and moved them to an isolated area in South America, where nobody else could really get to them unless they flew into the compound. So he was very isolated. And when you isolate yourself and you cut yourself off from the rest of the world, things can get kind of weird. So isolation is not a good thing. Isolation.
He had control over anybody who came. Even a member of Congress tried to come.
Yes.
Check out.
Wait. I'm getting excited, but wait. So this isolation leads to paranoia, right? Paranoia leads to more isolation, and in some cases also leads them to think that they're maybe a little bit more important than they really are, that they're a little divine. They start to get these grandiose feelings and thoughts about themselves, which just generates more paranoia, which just generates more xenophobia, right? Cutting themselves off. So paranoia can be a very bad thing that leads to aggression. Absolute dominion, this is what he was talking about. Feeling like they have absolute control over all of the members of the group. This is very bad when we feel like we have control, right, over a group. When we feel like our word must be followed no matter what. That can lead to some aggression. If the cult or the group idolizes death, Jones often said, and so did Marshall from Heaven's Gate, he also said this, we're not committing suicide, it's a revolutionary death, right? So if the cult is not afraid to die, then dying is not that big of a deal. And then finally, in most cases, there's some type of triggering event. Some type of trigger that set them off and caused a violent attack. So going to our example of Jim Jones, what was his trigger? Well, it was the arrival of Congressman Leo Ryan, who was a congressman from California. He had heard that there were people in South America that were being kept there against their will. And he wanted to go down there and check it out. He wanted to go down there and see if this was true. So he went down there and he visited and he talked to Jim Jones, and Jim's like, oh, everything's good here. 15 people while he was there came up to him and said, I want to leave. Can I please leave with you today? And Congressman Ryan was like, yeah, of course, you can leave with me. And Jim said, yeah, they can leave with you. That's no problem. As they were leaving to go back to California, Jim gave the order to shoot not just Congressman Ryan, but all the people that wanted to leave the cult too. He killed all of them. And then just a few short hours after that, he gave the order to his members to drink the Kool-Aid that was laced with cyanide. They were told that they were under attack by the CIA and they had to do it, otherwise the CIA was going to come in and kill them anyway. So the people voluntarily took the Kool-Aid, and those that didn't do it voluntarily, they were either forcibly injected with it or gunned down. Oh, that's heavy stuff. Yeah. All right, so we just talked about some, take a nice deep breath, right? Oh, man, that's some heavy stuff. So now I'm going to turn it over to you guys and ask if you have any questions for me.